Good afternoon and welcome to Double Coverage Radio. I'm your host, Travis Pipes. Sitting alongside me is Dave Mogensen. Dave, have some interesting things to discuss today in the way of Green Bay Packer football. Aaron Rodgers' first comments on the record with local media in Green Bay on a press conference. Would love to pick your brain from a coaching perspective and talk about some of the potential scenarios involving both the recent NFL draft, right, and Aaron Rodgers' position. He's gone on record now with some commentary about how he feels regarding the Jordan Love quarterback from Utah State pick there at the end of round one a couple of weekends ago. Dave, it's great to see you. You are watching Double Coverage Radio, also available at doublecoverageradio.com. Let's start right from the top. What were your thoughts in terms of Aaron Rodgers? Let's talk about his tone, right, in the general sense, his first comments to the media.
I think, one thing that people are really tying this to is the Favre to Rodgers transition and then the Rodgers to Love transition. Or I think the biggest difference between those two is that I think Rodgers has a better perspective of the overall building of the team. Not that Favre didn't have that perspective. I just think Favre probably didn't care as much as Aaron probably does. So even in his comment, everybody wants to know how he feels about Jordan Love, and he was pretty candid in saying that he was looking for something different, but he also understands that they're trying to make sure that the team is set up for more than that, just the next couple of years. So I think what I thought all along is this might mean that Rodgers is not going to finish his career in Green Bay. But I also think he understands that he understood that was a strong possibility throughout this whole time period. And I think he understands that Packers had to make a move on a guy they thought could be the next of their torch carriers at the quarterback position.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of compelling how he talked about being there watching the draft virtually, just like virtually everybody else who tuned into the NFL draft that weekend with Pat McAfee, the former Indianapolis Colts punter, and one of his best friends, former Packers linebacker, AJ Hawk. And he had said that the surprise that he sort of felt at that juncture, how do you think that factors into his preparation and maybe sort of quote lighting a fire? I know we want to use cliches to illustrate an athlete's, you know, ability to manage stress and really compete when the chips are down on the table. Is that something that you see as being problematic for how the offseason goes, given where we are with some of the uncertainty?
I don't know if it's necessarily problematic. I think there's different types of ways that athletes motivate themselves, right? And a lot of people are watching the Last Dance documentary and some of that stuff with how Michael Jordan would find the most trivial things to help motivate him for a random February game or even an NBA Finals game, right? I think Aaron Rodgers is in that same kind of mentality, right? You hear all the time about he keeps letters from college coaches that didn't want him when he first came out of high school and had to go to junior college, right? He keeps those letters, and he constantly would give Mike McCarthy crap about not drafting him number one when Mike McCarthy was with the 49ers, right? So I think though he's one of those guys that helps, I think, in his progression and stuff. So although I do think he understands that this is something that's necessary for the Packers to try to continue their record that they've put together since the Ron Wolf era began, I also think that he, in his mind, probably thinks he's got a lot more than 2 or 3 good years left. And now he wants to show the Packers that, hey, I'm going to have 5, 6, 7 more good years left, and you could have waited 5 or 6 years to get your quarterback of the future. So again, it's just something that goes into his portfolio of things that have irked him, and he'll use to try to show people how to get things done his way.
Yeah, that's actually right on the money. The other thing is, right, Packer fans are sort of at a place where you can say, hey, we as an organization do not draft quarterbacks when we're desperate. We draft them or we select them in free agency when it's a luxury. You know, they did that with Brett Favre when they had Don Majkowski. At the time, many felt he was entrenched as a potential long-term starter, had a couple of productive seasons. Obviously, we are familiar with in the recent history of Aaron Rodgers to Brett Favre and so on and so forth. So whether or not Jordan Love can continue that tradition obviously remains to be seen. It is obviously way too early to give any sort of assessment in the scenario. But when you're looking at it on paper, I think the general idea is fans want the results that are driven by the last game, right? Being one game away from the Super Bowl. How close is Green Bay really to competing for a championship, Dave?
I think it's all relative, and that's something that Aaron Rodgers even brought up. So when you hear about the talking heads, or you hear about fans even talking about it on Twitter or on Facebook and social media and things like that, you can tell that Aaron Rodgers is very self-aware of what the consensus is. And there's a lot of consensus that maybe last year the Packers were an overachieving 13-3 team, and this year they may fall back to where they should be, right? And that's not to say they should be bad, but maybe they fall closer to that 9-7, 10-6 kind of record. So he mentioned that in his press conference today, and I think that's another thing that's going to kind of drive him as where he thinks the Packers are probably maybe just one or two guys away. Or at times you can think of one or two guys. Doesn't necessarily mean new guys, right? So we've been harping on this since the draft happened, right? One or two guys means one or two guys to step up and be more productive than they were last year. So doesn't necessarily mean new influx of people. It's just people that are making plays they weren't making last year. And if you look specifically at the wide receiver spot, I know Rodgers is really high on MVS, and he brought him up and said, he's a guy that we're looking to make a big jump. EQ St. Brown, again, another guy who missed most of last year with injury, had a really pretty productive rookie year, another guy. So if one of those two guys can step up, and I think Rodgers is very conscious of that too, and will probably do whatever he can to help develop those guys and further their development to get that third-year jump.
Yeah, Gutekunst has gone on record, right, in saying we didn't feel at that juncture at the back half of first round that there was a guy that could necessarily come in and supplant an Alan Lazard or, recent acquisition Devin Funchess maybe, or other players that had been in the system or in the building for 1 or 2 years or whatever have you. So I would agree. I don't think Green Bay is necessarily the traditional quote one player away. Let's switch gears a little bit. Aaron has talked about in this press conference today the ability to prepare and get himself ready for the off season. He referenced the throwing portion of his program and other elements of that. How does the COVID-19 situation affect sort of the landscape of preparation if you're a position player like quarterback or maybe one of the other skill position players on the roster?
I think at this juncture, it doesn't affect it greatly. The one thing it may affect is these veterans are doing this stuff on their own normally at this time, right? This May period, and Aaron Rodgers mentioned that early May is when he likes to get back into some throwing routines. So the first part of his offseason is probably just strictly strength and conditioning work and things along those lines. Obviously first taking a break in that February March area, and then April's jumping back into strength and conditioning. But early May is when he wants to throw. Now, in years past, he might have had some of his receivers meeting him somewhere, he's meeting them somewhere and getting some throwing in, right? But it's all kind of done on their own. So I think the only difference is you're kind of tied to throwing with whoever you can find near you, right? He didn't mention them by name, but he mentioned some other NFL receivers, obviously probably from other teams that are in the area he's in, out in California right now, that he's throwing with, right? He's not going to say names, and everybody's going to start freaking out about, oh, he's throwing with so-and-so from the New York Jets or something like that, right? So I think that's Aaron Rodgers being very conscious of controlling the narrative, which is something he's really good at, and understanding that how much his words mean to the media, to the fans, and to everybody like that.
How concerned are you, or not concerned, as it were, on the other side of the spectrum, of Aaron Rodgers being in year 2 now of the install from Matt LaFleur's offense and sort of how they're shifting some of the responsibilities and some of the coverage reads and the assignments in that particular part of the offense? Is that something that you can do by opening up the book one-on-one, or do you need to be in the quarterback room virtually taking care of your responsibilities that way? What do you see as sort of the necessary parts of that process?
I would say from somebody at Aaron Rodgers' stature, right, he should be able to have film, have the playbook, have some notes from his coaching staff, and be able to digest all that information pretty easily on his own, right? Obviously, being in the quarterback room or even being in a virtual kind of conference when the NFL maybe allows that to open up in lieu of mini camps or OTAs will be helpful. But the one part that we didn't obviously listen to the whole finish of the press conference before we jumped on, but the one part that I was interested to see nobody asked a question was the question about the shifting offense and maybe taking some pressure off of Aaron having to do everything himself and the whole offense kind of rolling through the quarterback, which is the Mike McCarthy kind of offense, right? It's the one he's used ever since he was with the Chiefs and Joe Montana. Everything runs through the quarterback, where I think we're seeing and what this draft showed and what the offseason showed is they're looking to not maybe have that all go through Aaron. Obviously, still let Aaron be Aaron in some capacity, but making it through the running game and through shifting formations and motions and play action passing and try to make his life a little bit easier And maybe if Packer fans all their dreams come through, we get a John Elway type scenario where Aaron Rodgers doesn't go play for somebody else because he wins a Super Bowl or two and wraps up his career in Green Bay and is content with that.
Yeah, I think the thing I think is important for us to understand is, Aaron Rodgers has been in an NFL film room for the last 14 seasons, so he definitely has an ability to sort of study and maybe look at the Cliff Notes version. Being at that it's this early in the offseason, I would agree. What's your perspective, Dave, on the fallout and the ramifications of having a guy like Jordan Love, who's got a pedigree now as a first round quarterback? Are you in a position of thinking that potentially Aaron Rodgers may not finish his career? What's sort of the plan if you're general manager Brian Gutekunst in terms of the next succession routine that we're going to go through here with Green Bay? Give me a little bit of perspective on that.
I think there's a few things that have to be kind of mentioned when you talk about that, right? And Aaron was asked that question, and his answer was it's not something he controls at this point, right? He can control whether or not he plays anymore, but he can't control who he plays with if he wants to keep playing and the Packers don't want him. But there's a couple things to consider, right? Aaron Rodgers' contract over the course of the next two seasons, 2020 and 2021, it's not untradeable, but it'll create a big dead cap hit. And it's something they may want to do after this year. Who knows? But the high probability of them trading him now is probably less than 1% or not at all. And even after this upcoming season is probably pretty slim, strictly from the salary cap perspective. So that's one thing that's out there. The other thing to consider is if you're looking at kind of the salary cap kind of as a whole, you're going to have Jordan Love at a pretty thrifty contract for 5 years, right? And that's kind of, look at what the Chiefs were able to do is building a really good team around Patrick Mahomes because he's at his rookie contract, his first 5 year contract. That's not giant astronomical number that Mahomes deserves and will get when he signs his re-upped contract, right? So if you're Packers, you're probably ideally would like to let Jordan Love be your starter by his third year, give him a year of experience. So year 4 and year 5 of his rookie contract can be legit Super Bowl push kind of runs. You can spend some extra money in free agency, get some additional tools to help the team and make those years be as successful. Because then after year 5, if Jordan Love is pretty good, he's then going to demand the starting caliber quarterback kind of money. So all those things considered, I think what you're looking at is if Aaron Rodgers does want to continue playing into his 40s, highly more than likely it'll be not in a Packers uniform. And as much as Packer fans don't want to hear it, the high probability is it's going to be after the 2021 season is when Aaron Rodgers is more likely going to be traded to another team, or he's going to decide he doesn't want to play anymore and retire. But I think those are the scenarios that look like, based on all the salary cap numbers and just simple logistics thinkings of how teams are built, is the drop end data. You got 2 more years to probably cherish your Aaron Rodgers memories in a Packers uniform, and after that, he's going to go make some memories in a different uniform, more than likely.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't think that he sets himself in a situation where you look at Drew Brees at the conclusion of his last sort of mega contract going year to year. You got a guy you've invested in heavily, and I would consider a first round pick a fairly significant investment for any organization because you have that extra 5th year of team control, as you sort of alluded to. I would agree. I think Aaron Rodgers is probably at this point 32 games plus any playoffs away from sort of the next chapter, if you will. As sort of sad and melancholy it is to think about that for a lot of us that have watched Green Bay football for the last couple of decades. You've only seen a couple of guys do it, with the exception of a couple of seasons where there was some, very mundane injury issues and whatnot. But I agree. I think probably 2 years is the place that Green Bay could realistically absorb the cap hit and the dead money issues on that contract. At the end of the day, you also want him playing to increase his value at a high level. You want to, if you're looking for a trade partner, right, Dave, you want Aaron Rodgers to be playing at his peak. So whether you have Jordan Love as your long-term, commitment at the quarterback position, or whether it's Aaron Rodgers in the future, but I do think within the next couple seasons, it's probably going to be another change in the guard, which is going to be a place of newness for a lot of Packer fans. And I know for you and I, what is that, our 3rd quarterback we've seen in our lifetime at this point, coming through the stadium, kind of an interesting place to be. So my name is Travis Pipes. He is Dave Mogensen. You are watching Double Coverage Radio, available streaming on Facebook and online at www.doublecoverageradio.com. I just want to take a quick second and promote our Preps to the Pros Wisconsin Badgers State Series that's coming up on Tuesday night next week at 7:30 p.m. Central with Antoine Burns. Dave, if you want to talk a little bit more about Antoine Burns and what he brings to the show, and we'll get some of that stuff promoted and move on.
Yeah, definitely. So as we introduce our new features, right, our newest one is Preps to the Pros. Everybody knows who J.J. Watt and the Watt brothers and Brandon Brooks and some of the guys who've had a lot more success in the NFL. But not everybody knows the amount of players that came out of Wisconsin that did have a cup of tea in the NFL. So we're going to try to bring some light to that, right? Antoine Burns is our first guest on Tuesday night. Antoine's a Milwaukee North Division grad. Went to junior college for a little bit at Rochester, Minnesota. Then he went to the University of Minnesota, was all Big Ten, and found his way to a few different NFL teams. So we'll get Antoine on and kind of hear his story of moving through the ranks from the city of Milwaukee and MPS all the way making his way to the NFL, which will be cool and exciting.
Yeah, it'll be neat to feature the experience of somebody who kind of came here, as you said, player at North Division High School in Milwaukee. It's interesting to look at the perspective of what he went through in his career now, and I know he'll talk a little bit about his Be Great Foundation and some other elements there. So looking forward to having him on the show. Dave, any last thoughts on Aaron Rodgers' first comments in the 2020 calendar season as we kind of look ahead to kickoff, which is just a little more than 4 months away, if you can believe that, if everything goes according to plan?
Yeah, I think ultimately what you see is Aaron Rodgers is the consummate professional, right? And I think some people were hoping he'd come out and blast the organization and just get that kind of soap opera-esque stuff that people really love to see, right? The salacious headlines. Aaron Rodgers is never going to do that. He's very conscious of how much his words matter to everyone involved in the NFL and the Packers, and he's understanding that where his status is as somewhat of a role model to the youth, and he's also very understanding of what his brand means to him. And I think that he is going to make sure that he's professional. He did say he was a little bit maybe disappointed in the pick, but he understands it, right? So he was honest yet professional. I think that's what you always see out of Aaron Rodgers is somebody who's very conscious of what his words mean and always takes the high road and presents himself in a very professional manner. So ultimately, I think he may use this as a little bit of a chip in his shoulder, come out and have a good couple of years. He's probably going to dive into helping improve the young guys that need to get there and contribute for them to make that next step. Who's going to be that last piece, right? Because at this point we know unless it's Devin Funchess or somebody Reggie Bellington, right, that came in at wideout, it's going to be one of these new wideouts that steps up and becomes the next man up and puts them over the edge from that position, that perspective.
Yeah, it should be exciting to see how it all unfolds. For more updates on not just the Green Bay Packers and Aaron Rodgers and his situation in Titletown, USA, but for football coverage from the preps to the pros, check out Double Coverage Radio on Facebook, streaming also available on Twitter and on the Instagram. Check us out at www.doublecoverageradio.com. I'm your host, Travis Pipes. He's Dave Mogensen. We are signing out. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you on Tuesday night with Antoine Burns, former NFL player in our Preps to Pros series. Have a great weekend, everybody. Thank you. Be safe.